First part of our meeting, we're going to do some training with our city attorney, Rob Wall. And with that, I will turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Chairman Thomas. I've got my clock here running my stopwatch, so if I'm at 5 minutes before and it doesn't look like I'm wrapping up, stop me, would you? Wouldn't be the first time. I have spent a lot of time thinking what I needed to talk to you about tonight, train on, and I don't want to rehash a lot of the things that don't need to be rehashed. I want to thank you, Chairman Thomas, for meeting with me Thursday. We had a very good and probably longer than you wanted discussion, but it was very helpful to me. And
It was very good. I enjoyed it, so thank you.
Good, anytime. And I want to just thank Duncan for doing a little research for me as I was putting this together. I've been watching you for 4.5 years, even though you don't know me and I don't know you all very well, but I do watch pretty carefully what you do. And by and large, well, I won't even say by and large, there hasn't been anything that has come out of the Planning Commission that has caused me concern in terms of the city getting into trouble. I think you're doing your jobs very well. I think by and large the decisions that the city council has had to make in the last 4.5 years, they have done a good job, not without a lot of pain sometimes, but notwithstanding a lot of the threatening from developers. Knock on wood, Duncan. We haven't been vigorously challenged yet, and that's not to say that we won't soon or later or whatever. But the only reason I say that is that I'm not here to try and fix things because I don't think that's needed. What I did decide to do, I didn't turn on my phone. Sorry. Is what I've thought about is what can I talk to you about, also knowing a lot of the staff's here and I understand a number of the city council members are listening online. What could I present to you that would be helpful to enhance our process? And I do have a few thoughts. Most of it isn't, well, none of it is because I'm a land use genius. All of it is, frankly, from a school of hard knocks, predominantly over the last 4 decades, almost 4 decades. And I just want to make some observations and offer some suggestions. I'm not here, I don't know if you know, it probably doesn't matter to you, it does to me a lot, but my ethical obligation is to the city corporation. I'm not the council's lawyer, I'm not the mayor's lawyer, I'm not the staff's lawyer, I am the city corporation's lawyer, and my role is to make sure that nothing occurs in the city or try to prevent things occurring in the city that are either illegal or not in the fundamental best interests of the city of West Jordan. Now, obviously, it's through all of you that this city works, right? But I just wanted to make that clear to you, and so I'm not here trying to tell anybody what to do or how to do it, but just offer some perspectives. Lawyers have a reputation, and some of it's deserved, of being the no people. You can't do that. Obviously, that's the easiest legal position for any lawyer to take because the best way to avoid a claim or a lawsuit or a risk is to not do the activity. But that doesn't get us anywhere. Likewise, I will say that planners, in my observation over the years, because of their training and what they're expected to do in being your advisors and the council's advisors, have to be careful to not get caught in the esoterics of planning and realize that there's some very fundamental practicalities that sometimes don't fit what they learn in planning school. Just like with lawyers, there are many times that what I advise on was never even taught in law school and really doesn't fit the paradigm that I'm used to working in. I think the same is for planning commissioners. You're expected, both under the law and practically, to be the experts, the technicians on land use in the city. That is really what, if you read the state code and you read a lot of the treatises written about planning commissions, that's what you are. And above anybody else, in theory. You have a great aid in doing that by these folks over here who are very good. And their role is to be your staff. And one of the things that I've heard off and on, and this is not uncommon to West Jordan. I've represented a number of cities in Utah for many years and done a lot of land use work. And one of the challenges that cities have is that staffs, including the lawyers, but the professional staff and the planning commission and the city council, they have to kind of reach an equilibrium to where the lawyers and the planners and staff are giving their counsel about issues without telling the planning commission what to do or making you feel like you have to do it a certain way. Same with the city council. So in that end, I wanted to share something with you. This is a quote that I picked up from a seminar I actually went to that was sponsored by the National Home Builders Association. And this is not one that you have. This is just mine. I should send this to you because it was quite stunning. I thought that is really, I don't totally agree with it, but the sentiment is spot on. And it says, planning sounds like a rational process, but it doesn't play out that way. Like most situations, it's 20% technique and 80% politics and communication. Now, I don't necessarily agree with those percentages, but my experience has been that absolutely to the extent that you and we as staff and the city council and land developers don't communicate clearly and don't get on the same page, the percentage, the likelihood of the percentage going up for politics is huge. So in that regard, I want to share with you something that has helped me over the years. And I did give you a picture of a copy of this. It doesn't have a title, but what I call it is the standard spectrum. And this is applicable to not only the Planning Commission, this is applicable to planning staff, to lawyers, to the city council, land developers, residents. This is all fundamental to land use. And the reason I like this is because any land use decision, any land use provision in a code really boils down to all of us understanding this. And what this is four things. The police power that cities exercise is based on the Constitution of the United States, giving states and cities the authority to govern themselves. And police power in its broad sense doesn't mean police officers. It's the authority to impose regulations on people. In the land use context, there's really four fundamental types of standards that are imposed on any land use application. And some of them shouldn't be imposed in some circumstances, but these are always present. And if you look at this little chart across the top, and I've got some extra copies of this. Duncan, if you want to hand those out to... Okay, great. I characterize these as four standards, and this is me. This is my opinion, but I think it's helpful. On the far left of the spectrum, we have and you hear developers talk about this all the time. I have met the objective standards of your code, and therefore you must approve my application. Well, what they're talking about is those things that are in state law and the city code and the written policies are clear and obvious. An example, and that's the next line down, garage doors shall not comprise more than 50% of the ground floor street facing linear building footage. Alleys are exempt from this standard. That's pretty straightforward. It's not very subjective. Either on the footprint, you can see on the plans, the garages either do or don't meet this. That's an objective standard. And if all of the objective standards in an application, or all of the objective standards in a code that applies to an application are met, you don't have a choice. The council doesn't have a choice in whatever it is, if that applies. I sometimes like to analogize it to a glove, and I couldn't find one at home that was floppy enough. But if you can imagine your fingers being the city code or state law or case law, and the glove being the application. If you put that glove on and all 5 fingers stand up, that means that application has met the objective standards. But if one of those or 2 of those is down and those fingers fall, there's a problem. They have not met those objective standards. Objective standards should be easy to identify and easy to make judgment on. And I'm going to give us an example here in a few minutes on a provision of our code where I think it's pretty obvious what the objective standards are or are not. That's not good or bad. It's just is. It's what it is. The next one over is what I call discretion standards. And they're a little bit less subjective. And if you look below, those are subject to interpretation. Now, in the case of the Planning Commission, they're subject to your interpretation in either in the area of, for example, conditional use permits, where you act as an administrative body, where you're actually taking the code and you say, yeah, you've met the glove, and therefore you can build. In the case of the council, and in your case, it is in a legislative capacity, but you're making recommendations to the council as opposed to making a decision. An example that I pulled out of our code: the maximum height of buildings and structures in planned residential zones shall be established by the city council through approval of the master development plan. Where feasible, lower height and intensity of buildings, uses, or impacts shall be arranged around the boundaries of the development. That's on its face. There's some words there that give you direction of what the issues are that have to be addressed, but the clear standards of what that has to be are not there like they are in an objective standard, the example on the left. But it is less subjective than public clamor, and we're going to get to that in a minute. A little note at the bottom there: if the city code properly identifies these standards, they can have binding effects similar to objective standards. So in other words, if there's discretion for you to impose a standard or for the city council to impose a standard, and the decision you make is backed by credible studies, it, for all intents and purposes, is an objective standard. And if the developer doesn't comply, you don't have to approve the development. All right, let's go to the third one: aspirations and intent. This is the one where planners love to swim and write, and it's kind of like lawyers who like to read cases, and you look at them like, you guys are crazy. But this is kind of the area that and it's a talent, and I'm not particularly good at it. It's much more right-brained than I am. But these are statements or goals or of intent that you find in the city code or the general plan. But they're generally subject to a lot of interpretation and a lot of debate. Example, the intent of planned developments is to create more attractive and more desirable environments in the city and allow a variety of uses and structures. Well, there's, 30 people, 25 people here. I suspect that if we all were asked to draw a picture of what that means, we'd have very, very different pictures. None of them would be even close, likely. The last one is public clamor, and this is the one that's way over on the right. It's opinion. It's the most subjective. An example: the increased traffic will increase accidents and make pedestrian travel in front of the school and library more dangerous. Now, unless that's supported by a traffic engineer and whatever other objective empirical data you can come up with, that is nothing more than an opinion. Now, it can have relevance. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes. And you look at the bottom there, they may be considered in a legislative setting. However, you need to articulate the reasons. Just because the public doesn't want the development is not a reason. So, for example, in a decision or a recommendation you're considering for the city council, you absolutely can listen to residents. That's what this representative democracy is all about. Council is elected, you're appointed by them, you should be listening to the residents. And if you agree with something they say, a practice that I think is a good practice, and I'm not saying you don't do this because I've seen you do this a lot. I'm just saying it's something that we as staff and commissioners in the council should continue to always be cognizant of. And that is, make your motion in your own words. And even if that means you're going to read what the staff analysis was, don't say based on the staff analysis. Say what your conclusion is and explain it, even if it's parroting what the staff has said, if you agree with it, but make it your own. If you have 10 residents come in and talk about the traffic and you agree with them, it's okay to say in your comments or whatever, residents have a concern with traffic, but make it yours in your motion. Make it yours. The bottom, I want to just talk a little bit about that. And I recognize, boy, we're going fast here. Whenever you draw pictures or put something in writing, that's always dangerous. And I thought long and hard about how I wanted to give this to you because this could be sent whoever knows where. I didn't even put a disclaimer on it that it's not legal advice, but it's not. It's just my perspective. But if you look down at the bottom, there's the red line that gets fat as it goes to the right. that represents the breadth of decision-making authority you have. For example, if you're in a conditional use application, you're considering conditional use application. The law says, and let me just, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I did give you this handout. If you look at that, the conditional use review standards. If you look at line 14, and I wrote this like legislation so you can find where I'm talking quickly. If you look at line 14, it says a land use authority, and that's what you are when it comes to conditional use applications, shall approve a conditional use if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards. Most residents look at that and they think, holy cow, I never want to be on a planning commission. Lawyers are crazy and so are planners. My question to all of you is, what does reasonable mean? And I know you have your own opinion about that, and that's probably more of a just a question for you to think about. But what reasonable means is that whatever it is you determine you're going to impose, there need to be findings. And those are reasons that are based on credible evidence. Credible evidence means, for example, if you turn over the page under standard of review, what the law would consider credible evidence would be for example, in the context of real estate values, evidence of reduced property values from empirical studies or opinions by professional appraisers. If traffic is an issue, empirical studies and opinions of traffic experts. If crime's an issue, studies and opinions. The important thing to remember about this is that note at the bottom. When you decide that you have found credible, substantial evidence, remember to look at the application, both in terms of the use itself generally, not necessarily related to that location, but the use generally, and then as well as in the context of where that actual application lies. And sometimes that's different. Let me give you an example. I'm not going to use a West Jordan example because I don't want to get us sued. We won't. It's not one of your cases, but it's one that I handled many, many years ago in a city that was had an application before it for a gun range. And the gun range was on a major arterial in this valley, a county arterial, and it was up against a very nice neighborhood. The neighborhood sat here, the arterial was here, and there was a strip of land that was commercial and very nice businesses. Well, one of the most controversial issues was noise. And the neighbors were very concerned, as was a veterinarian office that was right next door to where this gun range was going to be built, that the noise from this gun range was going to be disruptive and unhealthy in some respects. Well, what I mean by the standard, the credibility, both generally and then as applies to the land, is that there was evidence that was produced, and by the way, this was appealed and we had a very contentious hearing over it at the appeal authority. Ultimately, the plaintiffs did not sue the city, but because I don't think they had a case, but there was evidence to show that generally these gun ranges built like this gun range was being built produced X decibels of sound in this type of climate in these temperatures. And that was just kind of a general piece of empirical data. It was much more complex than that. That's about as much as my simple mind can remember. But then it was a very different matter when you set that business down next to all of these residential homes and this arterial that already had a lot of noise from these cars. The experts came up with a very different analysis, not necessarily of the decibel level alone of the gun range, but how would it impact that neighborhood. Those are both very valid reasons upon which you can make a decision. And I would encourage you always to look for both of those, the use generally as well as the use in the specific location and environment that is being proposed. Okay, going back to this chart now. So when you're looking at objective standards in a conditional use appeal, you are very limited. You've got to go based upon what the code says and what credible evidence there is. And just to add a little humor here, you may not think this funny, I think it was. I found this blue University of Utah hat years ago in Walmart. And I thought, what the heck? Who would wear this? And then my wife said, that's pretty cool. And she's a U of U grad. So anyway, I bought this. But This is the kind of decision-making you make when you're working in your administrative capacity. The basis for your decision has to be made on very narrow terms. You don't have a lot of discretion, and like this little this shows here, it's the narrowness here. Sometimes, as I said, these discretionary standards can become objective if there's proper evidence behind them, but it's a very narrow scope of review. And if you think back to your conditional use appeals, and I appreciate that you do this, I'm going to help you maybe do it a little better. You always make findings, and that is exactly what you should do. And those findings are, we find that this application meets the criteria. And here are the criteria, and guess what? It fits. And it doesn't fit, it's my wife's size. But anyway, the hat fits, they get their approval, right? Contrast that with as you go down the, you want that? Funny story, Matt. I actually, Commissioner, I had so many people ask me for one of those. I got this at Walmart one day. And I said, I want to buy 100 of those hats because I knew people would like them. And they couldn't find any. And the day that I bought them were 7 or 8. I happened to buy all of the 7 that day. Anyway, I've never been able to, maybe there's a lot of swag out. They're probably a lot more available. But contrast that to when you're making a recommendation to the city council on an application. You've got a lot more authority. The breadth of your authority is vastly greater. Now, when I say authority, you're not making a decision when you make a recommendation to the council, but the breadth of what you can consider. And this is where you can really use your collective 7 backgrounds to be very creative and very critical in your thinking and really be a force in the city in helping it develop in the way that you want to see it develop. Honestly, if everything was based on objective standards, all we need is 2 professions. We need IT people to put all of the laws online and lawyers who think they know everything to interpret them. And that's all we need, because you look at the code and either the glove fits or it doesn't. But that's not what we want in our country, and that's not the way land use works. That's what this other hat is. I make Duncan come up and wear this, but we're kind of running short on time. This is the broad discretion that you have. This is the hat, the legislative hat you wear. And you can come up with all kinds of stuff. I bought all this stuff at Dollar Tree once and stuck it on this hat. Well, actually, one of my legal assistants made it for me. But this represents the breadth of discretion. The brim is huge. The reasons are much more expansive than that little hat there. And that's very significant because it allows you to look at these applications from many, many different angles.
Wait, I'm confused. Are you going to put it on or not? I think everybody wants to see that. No, not you. I'm not presenting. It's not my hat. There we go. Thank you.
I actually had a mayor in a city that I was doing some training for some elected officials, a group of them, and I knew one of the mayors, and he actually agreed to come up and stand with this on his head for about 10 minutes while I talked about it. But anyway, that's the hat.
We've seen Mayor Burton's hats. I know he wouldn't be embarrassed to do that.
Oh, yeah. Mayor, I am sorry.
He has hat envy.
He would love to have done that. Thank you, Mayor. I won't even start to try and respond to that. And now the bottom, the green one. What this represents is that when you're in your legislative capacity, and that's what you're doing, you're making recommendations to the council, you'll notice this green line covers the whole spectrum, every kind of standard. You get to use them all. And this is when you're, for example, recommending to the city council issues regarding zone changes, zoning map amendments, master development plans, general plan amendments, land use map amendments. You can be very, very thoughtful and creative in that regard. Let me just, if I can, now shift to something else I wanted to talk about here before we quit. I've got some other things, but we're running out of time. I'm going to give you a test. And I should have brought some prizes, but I didn't do it, and I apologize. Whoever wins, I'll buy you a prize. So, can you see that on your monitors? Okay. This is a provision from the city code. This is the findings for approval for a general plan and general map amendments. Any amendments to the general plan, including map, shall be approved only if, and then there's A through F. What I want to do is I want to go down through each of these and ask you, where on the standard spectrum does each of these fit? So look at A. The proposed amendment conforms to and is consistent with adopted goals, objectives, and policies set forth in the city general plan. Is that least subjective or more subjective? Yeah. Okay. It's probably in that aspirations area. It's a pretty objective thing. Now, I ask these five gentlemen sitting right here. They could probably make a pretty good case for why those are very objective in their minds from a planning perspective, but they really are more aspirational. Okay, look at the second one. The development pattern contained on the land use plan inadequately provides the appropriate optional sites for the use and/or change proposed in the amendment. Where does that fit on the spectrum? It's subjective, but it's not quite as subjective as the first one. You could look at neighboring neighborhoods. You could look at uses around, and you could make some arguments about why the application either is or is not appropriate. All right, C, the proposed amendment will be compatible with other land uses existing or planned in the vicinity. This is a tricky one, and it's caused a number of lawsuits, and it's also the impetus to a lot of pages that appear in development agreements. This one can be objective, but it also can be very, very subjective. And if you look at it in the context of the traditional neighborhood, you can say, well, you know, apartments in a traditional neighborhood, they don't fit. That's pretty clear. But 5 years from now, go out to Wood Ranch and see what they're doing out there. Go down to South Jordan in a daybreak and see what they're doing there. Very different opinions about what's compatible next to each other. Okay, D, the proposed amendment constitutes an overall improvement to the adopted general land use map and is not solely for the good or benefit of a particular person or entity. This one I love. It's a good standard. I've seen it in other codes. How many times do you hear from residents, and I'm not questioning them. I'm a resident too. I've made the same arguments at times when I've gone to planning commission meetings as a resident. This is just the developer lining her pockets. That's all this is about. It's the corporation making money. They don't care about our neighborhood. It's not an improvement. How about E? It won't adversely impact the neighborhood and community as a whole by significantly altering acceptable land use patterns and requiring larger, more expensive public infrastructure improvements, et cetera, that would otherwise be needed without the proposed change. How about that one? Of all of these seven, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, that's probably so far the most objective. And in fact, it could become very objective. And I'll give you an example here in a minute. It could also be very subjective, but you think about if there's a vast difference in the land use density that's being asked, the greater that density in most cities, that would create infrastructure issues. And so that one's probably a little bit easier to say, yeah, this either the glove fits or it doesn't on that one. When it comes to a general plan amendment or land use map amendment. F, the proposed amendment is consistent with other adopted plans, codes, and ordinances. That one can be very objective too. That one can be a lot of work for staff, and that should be a lot of work for staff. And if I was a staff member, I'd maybe lobby to get rid of that. We got a lot of pages that staff needs to go through when they get an application to see if an application is consistent with all this stuff. But it is what it is. Well, what do I take from this? And I hope you're drawing some of your own conclusions too, but we're running out of time. And so let me just share with you a couple of thoughts I have on this. E is all but an objective standard, depending on the difference in infrastructure need. And irrespective of how you answered A, B, C, D, and F, if you find that E is going to create expensive needs, this application should fail. Because if you read the language, shall be approved only if, and then it's not or you look at E at the end, it's and F, so it's not, these are disjunctive in the sense you have to have every one of them or it fails. There are dozens of these in our code. There are dozens of these in every city code you look at where there are a mix. And that's okay, because that's what gives you the opportunity to really use your creativity. A couple of other points on this. On applications where, say for this type of a provision, where the application is either really big or it's very controversial, if you don't feel like you're getting a clear picture from the staff as to what the standards are on this spectrum, don't feel like you have to approve or disapprove, decide that night. Tell them to go back and do their homework. That's what and whether it's a legal issue or a planning issue, we need to provide you clarity in the reports that come to you. And the other part that I take from this is if you'll think about these applications in this context, this will give you a template to look at and say, I think those three things, staff, that you're telling me they have to meet, I don't see those are objective standards. I think those are subject to opinion. Push back. I know I can tell you they're not here tonight, and there's a reason, because I told them they couldn't come. No, I really didn't. They don't want to come. Other than Duncan is here. These guys challenge me all the time, and I challenge them all the time, and we have a lot of healthy debates, and that's not a bad thing. So I would just invite you to feel free to make sure you're getting what you want. A couple more thoughts, Mr. Chairman, then I'll quit. Let's see. Oh yeah, I wanted to share with you one thing. I know that there were some comments made last time about the word findings in this book. Just for the record, there's nothing in the law that requires staff to make findings in their reports. And in fact, the advice that I've given over the years to staff is, I don't care whether you call it a finding, a monkey, or whatever. What you should be doing is analyzing the code and telling the Plan Commission where the application fits and where it doesn't fit. And if you feel like using the word finding by the staff is causing you to alter your thinking or force you in, tell them to change it. And I know Scott's looked at this and he's pondering it, and they get it. But I just use that as an example. If you find things in the code where you feel like it's not clear, and it could be clear, that a more objective standard or something that is objective that you think, yeah, in this community, we ought to have some latitude in that, bring it up. And remember, this goes for the council as well as you. Mr. Thomas is the chair, and he has certain authority. At the end of the day, if you want something changed, get 4 votes. That's where you can really exercise your authority. And the same advice goes with city council. They all have their opinions. But at the end of the day, if the staff isn't doing something they like, if you're not doing something that they like, they can vote to make you do it. In fact, in state law, there's very little direction on what planning commissions do. It's left to the city council. There's a half a dozen obligations you have, but other than that, it's up to the elected body. My final thought is this, and I'm going to go back to our National Home Builders Association quote. Most of the conflicts that I've seen over the years have at their base, in significant part, not everything, but in significant part, some failure on the part of those involved, whether it's the lawyers, the planners, the planning commission, the city council, the applicant, a failure to communicate, a failure to understand all of the facts, and sometimes there aren't a lot of facts, but understand them all the same. A failure to understand this and knowing what the developer is obligated to and not obligated to. And I would just really encourage you, the planning staff and the council, to be very thoughtful about that. Yeah, we're out of time. I don't want to go there. One final comment. There's 2 pieces of literature that I would strongly recommend to all of you. I think most of you have read these, but if you haven't, in my view, and this is just Rob, every elected official, every planning commissioner, every planner, every lawyer who deals in land use, every applicant, and honestly, every resident really ought to read this. This is a really good treatise. Now, I will tell you it's already out of date, because the provision about how you analyze conditional use permits that's in here is not the law anymore. This came out about 2 months before the May of last year, 2021, when the conditional use statute changed. So there's some things here you got to be careful of, but this is a really quick primer. The other one that you really ought to read is this one. And there aren't a lot of books, and this looks long, but it's really short in the context of land use. But there aren't a lot of books in the state written that can pull it all together like this. Now, as I told Chairman Thomas, Craig Call, who I know very, very well, he's a remarkable lawyer. And he has been a legislator, he's represented land developers, he's been a city council member, he's represented cities. I don't necessarily agree with some of the way he shades some of this literature, his comments. I, obviously, because I'm a city attorney, and I have been for many years, I've represented a few land developers, never in Salt Lake County, but it's been a very small part of my practice. I would maybe write it a little different, but by and large, this is really a good piece of literature to read.
It's an easy read.
It is easy to read. He's a really good writer. This is a second volume, and it's just very, very good. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry I took 5 more minutes.
Here's my 5 minutes.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Mr. Wall, a moment ago you said that when we make a motion, we should make it our own.
Yeah.
Very often the staff provides us, and we see it on our monitors here, they provide us with exact wording for motions.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we should not be doing it that way?
Thank you for clarifying that. No, I'm not, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I guess the better way to say it is if when you make a motion, you're giving reasons and/or making findings. Make those reasons and/or those findings your own. So it's very clear. And I would go so far as to say, if you're in one of these either sometimes more complex, sometimes controversial applications, the motion could be, for example, that you move to deny the application or approve the conditional use permit for the following reasons. And then you can list those. And like I said, you could even be parroting what the staff has written. But I have seen planning commissions, and I've actually advised planning commissions sometimes when I've been their advisor, to then in the motion say, and I move that we ask the staff to prepare this motion in a written finding and to bring it back to us for our final vote. That becomes your recommendation and your findings, not that original motion. And you can do that, and you're not bound to it until you approve those written findings that you get maybe in the quiet of not sitting in front of 50 residents. You can read through what Duncan and Scott and his staff have put together and say, yeah, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's not what I meant by 5. Duncan, Scott, this is what I meant. They change it. They bring it back to the next planning commission meeting. That's where you make your formal decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Second question,
Yeah.
where do we get that book? We're going to get a
You
copy
got
of
it.
that.
Oh,
You were given it about about a month ago, 2 months ago?
Was he on the commission at the time?
I believe so. If not, we've got, I think, spare one, don't
Yeah,
you?
we've got extra copies,
Scott?
right, we can get.
I'll give you mine, but if, I've got my name in the front of it, but we can get you a clean
We'll
one.
get you one, because I know we had a couple extras. Now, she may not have gotten one, that's true, so, but we'll get them. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wynn. All right, we'll formally start this meeting, a few minutes late. We'll convene the West Jordan Planning Commission for September 20th, 2022, with all 7 members present. First on the agenda is the consent calendar for approval of the minutes.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve. Oh, I'm not on there.
Commissioner Hatt, well,
There we go. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve.
yeah, we have a,
Second.
all right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, carries 7-0. Next on our agenda is public hearing with final action by the Planning Commission. And item number 2 has been continued until October 4th, our next meeting. And that's the Jones Landing Building.
Yeah, we need a motion on that. And I'll go ahead and make a motion that we continue item number 2 till the October 4th meeting.
Thank you. We have a motion.
I'll second that motion.
And Commissioner Marchant will second it. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries 7-0. Third on the agenda is the Truck Ranch, 9204 South, 5600 West, preliminary site plan, 7.61 acres, preliminary subdivision plat, 5 lots on 19.81 acres, and a conditional use permit for motor vehicle sales and service used in the SE3 zone. And it looks like a Jaden Wagner. Would you like to come up and?
Are you guys asking me questions, or I just want me to?
Tell us what you are going to do with your property there.
Oh, right on.
You
Yeah,
have
so
present application.
thank you. That approximate 20 acres, about 16 of it want to create into an auto mall. And the other just under 4 acres will be like a retail space where it'll be kind of flex retail where different businesses can come in and lease food and beverage. Could be a dentist, could be a piano sales store. We've leased to some piano sales stores before. You smart, but yeah. So the Auto Mall Truck Ranch is a company that I own, and we have multiple locations here currently in Utah. One in Logan, one in American Fork, and a couple out of state. We primarily sell trucks, hence the Truck Ranch, and this will kind of be our headquarters as well. And it'll be a large service department for the public for regular oil changes and repairs for any years, makes, and models of vehicles. And one of the reasons why we were looking to come out west is we feel like there's an opportunity because it's kind of an underserved demographic. And I think you guys all probably can, in a lot of different types of industries, it's underserved. A lot of population, but not a lot of infrastructure has been built to match. Little to none, I think, like dealerships out west there where there's a lot of population. We approached the RDA, and they actually kind of found the same finding. I think they had an exact number that they shared with us, but it's apparently only like 8% of your residents are buying vehicles in your city. That number could be off, but it was barely, very, very low. And really, and I mean, Harriman and South Jordan, Riverton, those are all kind of very similar because there's just no dealerships really in those cities, or very few. So we think it's a good opportunity to have a successful business there, and with the location being right on the freeway, we feel like it'll get a lot of exposure and be a good be a good addition to the community because everyone needs vehicles and needs their vehicle serviced and repaired. And as far as the retail, we plan on having a few different food beverage concepts in there, and then some other just general retail, whoever kind of comes to the table. But ultimately, just more additional services to the community. So we're excited about it. We've been working on it for over a year. And yeah, do you guys have any questions?
Commissioner Quinney?
Yeah, which lot are you doing the flex building on?
Lot 1?
That the lot 1 I thought was where you guys are gonna put your facility. Where are you putting the restaurants and that stuff at?
Oh, the lot 2.
Lot 2, okay,
For
that's what I
the-
thought. I just wanted to make sure.
The restaurants, yeah. So lot 1, 3, 4, and 5, those are proposed auto dealerships. Mind you, a dealership, call it maybe a Ken Garf or something, they could potentially buy lot 3 and 4 and do a larger facility. But we're thinking that those sizes will be sufficient. I don't know if we'll get many franchise dealerships wanting to come out to West Jordan because they're They've invested a lot of money in their current facilities. But we expect there's going to be some really good quality independent dealerships similar to Truck Ranch that will want to come out to West Jordan.
Commissioner Shelton?
Thank you. On the previous map that was being displayed, can we switch back to that? It says 9180 South existing. That's not actually existing, is it?
What's
No, not at the time with the subdivision. I think this is just for illustrative site plan purposes, so that road, private road will
The
be
road
built.
does not currently exist.
No.
All right, okay, no, thank you. That answers my question.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And Larry, looks like you have this one.
Yeah, and then Paul Coates from the RD, represents the RDA or his staff for economic developments here if you have any questions about the redevelopment agency's role in this. That being said, the slide, the aerial to the left, the redevelopment agency actually owns the 19.86 acres at present. And to orient you, it's right on the corner of Mountain View Corridor and 90th South. 5600 West is on the very east side of this project. It is much less intensely used as it reaches this point. What's around it, there is some single family to the northeast, and then there is a multifamily development directly across 5600 West, across from the Truck Ranch subdivision, with industrial uses to the south of the Truck Ranch subdivision. And as far as the land use map, it is in regional commercial and it is zoned SC3, which is our regional commercial zone. And I mistakenly omitted Maverick is on the hard corner of 5600 West and 90th South. They've been there for maybe a year and a half, 2 years at this point. This is the plat for Truck Ranch subdivision that was up. You can see lot 1 is where Truck Ranch will be, and then Mr. Wagner explained what the other lots will be used for. The lots vary in size, Truck Ranch being the largest at about 8 acres. The rest of them are between 3 and 5 acres in area, and the area description is in the staff report of the lot sizes. There will be a dedication of property required. As you can see, the hatched area on 5600 West, a very long, narrow sliver of property that will be dedicated to the city of West Jordan. And that is the reason that this subdivision actually is coming to the Planning Commission, because of that requirement for dedication on 5600 West. Now, getting to the site plan, not only will you be considering the preliminary major subdivision, but also the site plan for Truck Ranch. As I said, it's about 8 acres in site. We'll have about a 76,000 square foot building and be surrounded by parking. Now, you say that might be a lot of parking, but that is, you want to lock out a lot of parking when you're dealing vehicles. And so the parking hopefully will be mostly filled up with vehicles for sale. Maybe this current used car crisis will abate someday, and it will fill up and become a very generous revenue source for the city of West Jordan. These are the elevations. So if you're looking at the north of 90th South, right off 90th South, that is what you will see, the front of Truck Ranch. To the south, to the west is what you can kind of see in the middle. That's what the view from Mountain View Corridor as you're exiting off of there. And then the east will just be a mirror image, really, of the building, a little less, fewer doors. It is a auto dealership, an auto repair facility, and auto servicing facility. So I think that the architect has done a good job in adding windows and relief to the building. I think it'll be a very attractive building coming off the Mountain View corridor. The design review committee did look at this building. I think it's a very attractive building with a lot of glass front there, particularly looking at it from the front. And it is what you, I think, would see. It reminds me a little bit of the Larry Miller dealership in Draper, a little smaller, but this is what the kind of thing you see when you look at that coming off. I think it's 114 South or whatever. But I think the architect's done a very good job on the architecture of the building. I think it's a very attractive structure. The one thing is this is a conditional use permit for used vehicle sales in the SC3 zone. There are 6 conditions of approval that are intended to mitigate any detrimental impacts to the area because of the use. The planning commission can pay particular attention to those as they are, as you're making your approval of the conditional use permit. Most of them have to deal with outdoor storage of tires, vehicle parts, and that type of thing, and that would be this is obviously going to become a gateway to the city, and you want to preserve that look. You don't want, I've seen, I'm not saying that Truck Ranch ever does this, but I've seen tire stores that have stacks of tires outside. Not only is it unsightly, it leads to mosquito issues, with the water contained in the tires. And certainly you don't want other types of fluids laying around outside. And then, of course, painting should only be done in an approved spray booth. And repairs and upgrades should take place in the building to keep the noise and that type of look away from the neighborhood it is in. With those conditions of approval of the conditional use permits and requirements of approval of the subdivision and site plan, staff recommends that the planning commission approve the subdivision site plan and conditional use permit for Truck Ranch. Do you have any questions for me at this point? And as I said, Mr. Coates from the Economic Development is here if you have any more particular questions about the property deal. So,
Commissioner Wynn?
Just a quick question for you, Larry. I read somewhere that there's only 2 handicap spaces for this facility. That doesn't seem like a lot to me, but does that meet code?
yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. There's a lot of parking stalls, but most of the stalls are related to sales of vehicles, and the building department will verify that again when the building permit is issued. They're really the enforcer of handicap stalls, and so it will be checked when the building permit's issued. So,
Commissioner Marchant?
I have a question for Mr. Coates with Economic Development, just about the RDA. So, does the RDA have funds? Are they delegating any funds to Truck Ranch?
No, we're not providing any funds.
No, okay. And then, is there an RDA plan in place?
For that particular property?
For this property?
Only in a general sense. We bought that property, the RDA bought that property, I think about 6 years ago, for this purpose specifically.
So it matches what the RDA wants to do
Yeah,
with the
that
property?
was our intent. We were a little worried that we weren't ever gonna get an auto mall on this property, but, fortunately, Truck Ranch came to the table.
Awesome. So is it just a lease agreement then?
No, this is actually a purchase, it's called a participation agreement
Okay.
in RDA language. And once they meet certain conditions, then we'll go ahead and sell the property to them. But they'll be installing a lot of improvements ahead of that sale.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I also just want to apologize to the commissioners and staff and applicants tonight for my mini commissioner in attendance.
you can never start them too early.
That's what I think.
So you don't get double pay though. That's the problem.
Dang it. Half pay, right? My babysitter failed and my husband is physically unable to. care for her, so.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up for a public hearing. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak on this if you wish. Please come up to the podium and state your name. Is there anybody online? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission for comment and/or motions. Commissioner Wynn.
I'd like to just make an observation. In the draft general plan, which we've all been studying studiously, I noticed on pages 152 and 153, there's some information regarding gross retail sales and per capita gross retail sales in the city of West Jordan. And this information, these graphs document that per capita gross sales lag way far behind Salt Lake City, West Valley, Provo, Orem, and Sandy. And so for me, this truck ranch represents a fabulous opportunity to increase gross retail sales, which I think is great for the city.
Agreed. Commissioner Shelton?
Yes, I just wanted to voice my support for this application. I'm really excited to see it. Thank you.
Commissioner Marchant?
I would also like to echo my support, especially knowing that it matches what they want to achieve with the RDA. I think that that's a great indicator of the success and the planning that the city staff has put into this project and getting them.
I know this has been a process and it's been coming along for quite a while, years as a matter of fact, and I totally support trying to bring some auto sales to our city that can help generate revenue and actually help keep some of our revenue within our own city. I think that's one of the big things that we are definitely lacking. Commissioner Hatch?
I just have to echo that. I think we have often said over the previous years, we need auto sales. So this is perfect. Thank you for your hard work.
Okay, Commissioner Allen?
Perfect, I was just about to ask, thank you. I read through the staff report. I felt that staff very logically and well set out all of the various findings, and I'm completely comfortable and echo that those are the same findings that I would have come across. It sounds like everybody else was on board with that too. And based on that, how many, are there 3?
Site plan, subdivision, and conditional use permit, and they need to be approved.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
Not necessarily in that order, but they all need to be approved
All
separately.
right, well, and thank you for putting them up on here. We'll move through the same order that staff had, so makes it easier for me. But based on those findings that we've discussed and the requirements of approval that are in the staff report and shown here on the page, I move that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary site plan for this application.
Commissioner Quinney?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that one carries 7-0. Next, do you want to just continue? Keep on going.
Did we just switch pages?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I blinked for a minute and it still looked the same. Based on the same findings, I move that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary subdivision for this application.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, again, that carries 7-0. Might as well get on a roll.
And here we are. So, again, based on the same findings, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use permit for this application. With the conditions of approval shown here.
Commissioner Quinney?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries 7-0. And was that all 4? Or 3?
One more.
Oh, that's all there was? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is discussion item number 4, Comprehensive General Plan. Discuss and provide the input regarding the 2022 West Jordan Comprehensive General Plan update and citywide applicability. And looks like Ray, you're gonna take the lead on this one?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
As you all recall, back in August, Planning Commission and City Council held the joint meeting to start into the discussion about the general plan. At that time, we just barely scratched the surface. We talked a little bit about the General Plan Committee's involvement in working through the plan, and then we went through some of the state code requirements. After that, we went through some of the proposed changes to the future land use map, and then we went through and did some of the Planning Commission and Council's recommendations to the text itself. We didn't really get a chance to talk to you about what efforts have taken place up to this point. And I think that's important for the planning commissioners to kind of understand, because there was a tremendous amount of work that took place at the General Plan Committee level. This is the Planning Commission's general plan, so theirs is basically a recommendation to you. Yours is a recommendation to ultimately to the City Council. So the General Plan Committee, again, was appointed by the City Council. They met over 20 times, and that was just in their regular meetings. And that began back in 2020. In early 2021, the General Plan Committee set up 3 subcommittees, and each subcommittee was responsible for 4 elements or 4 chapters in the general plan, and to go through those, each one of those. So in addition to the general meetings, there were also these subcommittees that were responsible for going through each section of the general plan itself, which is a tremendous undertaking. The 3 committees were like the growth subcommittee, which is responsible for like the economic development, growth management, housing, transportation. There was a resource subcommittee that was parks, recreation, trails, urban design, historic preservation, and then the general subcommittee, which was the introduction, population, demographics, environment, and then sustainability. So the way that it worked was that, just as a starting point, staff went through each one of the chapters and made some recommendations to the General Plan Committee. The General Plan Committee talked about those, and then the subcommittees took a look at those recommendations and came up with their own changes, suggested changes on those. Staff went back and redid and then each one of the subcommittees came back to the General Plan Committee. Hopefully I get this straight, but there was a lot going on for each chapter. And then staff went back and made the changes, and then it went back to the General Plan Committee. So each one of these chapters and all the changes that we discussed at that level came back to the General Plan Committee. And what you have before you tonight is just kind of a culmination of those recommendations from the General Plan Committee. So it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot of work, a lot of time that was spent on each one of those chapters. I think as we start going through these, what we would like to do, and it's just kind of up to you, is how you'd like to proceed with each one of those. But what we thought is, rather than just take the whole book and say, here you go, is just to take it apart in different elements. We were going to start tonight with some of the easier ones, because the ones down the road, like the land use chapter, is going to be, maybe the parks and open lands might be a little more difficult, and we need to take some time and chew on those a little bit. So just as a starter tonight, maybe we can go through a couple of those chapters and just see what you think. This is a discussion, so I would just like your feedback, some of your comments. The General Plan Committee did a great job at getting us to this point, and now it's, what do you folks think?
And I know there's been a lot of effort, both from staff and from the Plan Committee on this, hours and hours. I served on that committee for a while, and, well, I guess I'm still serving on that committee, but yes, I mean, my hat's off to everybody who has participated, and I know there's been a lot of hard work and thought going into this, so thank you, Ray.
Yeah. let's see. Oh, I have control. So tonight, what we thought we would do is look at just go over the introduction. I don't know how long this is going to take for tonight, but as I mentioned, some of these other ones are going to take more time. But just to start out with like the introduction, the population demographics, housing, and historic preservation. But first, just in terms of the goals or the general goals and things that the General Plan Committee wanted to see done is that one of the things that the old plan was divided into goals, policies, and then implementation measures. And one of the things the General Plan Committee would like or wanted to see was for those things to be consolidated so that there weren't so many of those goals and policies, that they were much more manageable. And so there was a lot of time that was spent in kind of weeding out the goals that had already been attained by the city, the duplicate goals, there was a lot of those in there, and then coming up with new goals as they relate to what the city, how we see the city proceeding down in the future. So I think those the goals will ultimately be renamed to guiding principles, as you had suggested in those. So we're working on that right now, and the draft that you have is the previous version to that. So we're still working on that. It's still a work in progress. One of the things that we're also looking at doing is in the general plan, or in the draft general plan, the goals are just at the end of each section. They're just kind of in blocks. But we're now taking a look at those goals and see if we can put a hierarchy to those, to where it drops down through and it's just easier to find and where it makes sense. You know, for example, one of those says preserve the identity of West Jordan as a family-oriented community through providing a range of housing types, styles, sizes to fit the various needs of the family life cycles. Then under that would be another goal, but it would be kind of subordinate to that goal. Encourage a wide variety of housing types to meet the needs of all life stages. So we're going through all that. There are like 40, there are a lot of goals. And so we're trying to, again, catch all the duplicates, trying to consolidate those just where they fit. So that it's easy reading, it's easy to find those things. Let's see. So maybe what we'll do is just start with the introduction. Maybe what we can do is if we can just shift over to the plan itself. Yeah. There we go.
Could I share maybe just some general observations as this pulls up? So we read through, the 4 chapters. I thought it was great. I really like how the goals are set up at the end of each chapter. I understand these are more ideas that are going to then formulate into more measurable goals and other plans and things. I think it's really well set up from that direction, that formula. I think the plan obviously has a lot of time and effort, and it shows that. I have a handful of comments, mostly grammatical. There's a handful of things like 1964, it says that there were 104,000 people living in West Jordan. Little things like that I captured, and I'll capture all of that and send it over. Apparently, Julie, thank you for all of the help with that, but when I try to download it, it doesn't download with my comments attached.
That happened to Cindy Quick the first time, but then she tried it again and it worked, so.
I'm going to try and play with it
know.
tonight and see what I
Okay.
can come up with, and push come to shove, I'll just screen capture and put them all into a Word document and call it good. But I came up with maybe 50 very small, minor nitpicks that don't change the overall content of the document. I think the content of the document is great, and I'm good with it.
And then if you'd like, you can just kick those comments directly to me, and then I can take care of those. That'd be great. So just on the not on the introduction, but just, I can't remember what this is called, just the The vision, yeah, the vision statement. None of that's changed.
Good call.
Okay, as far as the introduction, the general plan committee just changed that. It was reworked just so that it just was clearer. It just reads better. It flows better. We did add a section that talked about, it was kind of an introductory discussion about the survey that was conducted, and we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. We also added language about the open houses that were held at the Bingham Creek Library and the Viridian. One of the things in the 2012 plan, it really only talked about or mentions the city's capital facilities plan and the Salt Lake County electrical plan. Well, when it comes right down to it, there are a lot of plans that the city uses to manage the city. And so what we've done is we added a section saying that there are a lot of other plans that are in that are integrated with the general plan. They all go hand in hand. They all support each other. But we have, like I say, some other plans like the parks plan, the transportation master plan. All those are integrated with it. So we added language that kind of ties all that together. The general plan committee, I think this is important, really wanted to keep this at a high level. They wanted to drill down into some of the things that you might find in the master plans or in these individual or specific master plans. So the general plan committee went through that with it in mind that they wanted to keep it just like the high level visionary document and leaving the more detailed or more specifics to those other plans. So those are kind of the basic changes that are in the introduction. Did you folks find anything that you'd like to talk about that section? Okay. Population and demographics. I think one of the reasons that this took so long is just getting information from the census. We had to wait for quite a while to do that. So all the population and demographics information that's in that chapter has all been updated according to the 2020 census and then also the 2019 American Communities Survey. Pretty straightforward. Some of the highlights are, West Jordan is now the third largest city in the state. It's pretty amazing. Because when I first worked here, it was back in '86, I think, and we had 40,000 people. So I've seen a real change.
So not 109. Okay.
Not
Or
100.
for whatever it was that Ammon said.
I lived it.
That was 1964, came down.
The city also had a recession in population.
That's been pretty interesting. Ethnic distribution was changed somewhat. The largest growth's been in the Hispanic population. Back in 2010, it was 18%, and in 22, it risen to 22%. Median family income is a little higher than Salt Lake County, but the per capita income is a little lower than Salt Lake County, and that's just because there's larger family size here in West Jordan. So those are really the basic changes. It's not a long chapter, but like I say, it's all been updated now. So were there any questions about this one? Okay.
Commissioner Allen?
So it wasn't on this page. I'm trying to recall exactly where it was. There's a discussion about with the housing that we're currently approving, we expect to be good through 2050. With the amount of housing and the growth that we're experiencing, that we're not going to have a shortage of homes. Am I misremembering where that's located?
Is that in the housing? That's in the housing section?
It's going to be in the next section, isn't it? Okay, I'll hold it.
Okay. So Mark will just take a couple minutes to just go through the housing section. He was pretty heavily involved with that. So.
All right, thanks, Ray. Yeah, so the housing section, a lot of this a lot of the updates were really involved in just updating the numbers based on the census, the 2020 census, the American Community Survey, and our building permit records. So I'll just kind of briefly go over those. But, so the first section, let's see, let's go back here. This is just kind of the intro section where we're just kind of updating it and making it a little bit more modern. So this talks a little bit more about housing availability and affordability and some of the challenges we've seen in the last 10 years with that. So the housing inventory section, this kind of covers just basically our single family and multifamily numbers. Essentially, we saw a pretty steady increase from the first half of the past decade, and then once we hit 2015, things really kind of started to take off, both in single family and multifamily. And we've broken that down a little bit more in terms of single family and multifamily permits. You can kind of see here down in the graph, but yeah, so single family was pretty steady through most of the decade. Multifamily was pretty well down in the first half and then started to kind of pick up. Some of these spikes that you'll see here with multifamily, kind of interesting. We mostly attribute that to probably the balanced housing ordinance, which was adopted around that same time. And so we had kind of a dearth of past multifamily projects that were vested before that ordinance went into effect. And so you can kind of see here, that's probably the reason for the dip there in 2016, and then kind of steadily increased there. So 2018 onward was probably mostly due to some of the exceptions we have in the cap and or the balanced housing ordinance.
That's okay, I still call it cap and grade.
Force of habit. Okay, so the next section, this one's brand new. This has to do with accessory dwelling units. So this is kind of a new thing that's caught on in the last several years, primarily with the changes in the state legislature. But this section just talks about the two different kinds. So there's internal accessory dwelling units, which are kind of your typical mother-in-law apartments or basement apartments, contained within the house itself, and external accessory dwelling units, which are smaller dwelling in the backyard. Let's see.
Mark, on that ADU, you don't have to go back to it, more of a question. We've got, there was a comment in there about how we've, as a city, received very few applications, which is kind of expected, I think.
Yeah, at the time we wrote that, that was when the ordinance was pretty new, and so, yeah, we had not received a whole lot. It's starting to grow as we start to get more, we're starting to see a lot of walkout permits for, basement stairwells and things like that. And so those are kind of what trigger the ADU permits. But even then it's slowly building.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. I mean, I suspect a lot of people were putting them in, especially the internal, where, it can get away with, it's kind of hidden, so we don't necessarily get a building permit every time, some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's really tricky with these is that, sometimes we'll get people that want to put in a kitchen in their basement, but may not necessarily want to rent it out. And so and that's not even getting into the differences of, are they renting to family, are they not? And it gets very tricky. So
We're seeing a little bit of a traction and starting to increase a little bit more then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think those that want to comply with the law, because we require a license, and my one concern is I believe that there's a lot that is happening that people aren't But yeah, as of next year, we're gonna have to start reporting to the state, the number of accessory dwelling units, because that's a big, they feel that is an answer to some of the moderate income housing issues. And if we don't get those licensed, then we can't report. And I can guarantee you there's a large percentage that are unlicensed and, but how do you track those down? So,
What is the city doing to kind of help track those?
well, we track them when we license them, and if we find them, then we tell them to, come in and get licensed. And so, but it becomes an enforcement issue is what the problem is. So,
What is the enforcement for an unlicensed ADU?
just to have them come in and get a license. And
There's no like fine associated or time period?
I don't know the answer to that. I think, Duncan, if they, they get a notice of violation, so it would go into the normal code enforcement process, and if they fail to comply, then they would be subject to civil penalties, go before the administrative law judge, that type of
Within
thing.
like a certain time
Yeah,
frame?
but I think,
Right, I'm not aware of any reported violations, but just for the commissioner's edification, whatever the code enforcement infraction might be, weeds, ADUs, whatever, the mayor's really been proactive in instead of a punitive hammer dropping, we just want the community to look good. And so there's a 2-week courtesy notice before there's any official nasty letter that says you're in violation. It's 2 weeks, please come into compliance. A reinspection is done after that. There's 2 weeks after that, when they actually receive the official NOV. And then if there's still no compliance, then it does go to our administrative law judge.
Is there any landscaping requirements for like front yards? So I know of some cities that have landscaping requirements for their front yards, and there is like a grace period after something has been built, or in our city, more of like a re-landscaping grace period could be in effect, but.
an ADU ordinance is based upon the criteria that municipalities were allowed to adopt in the statute. And there was nothing, the only thing we can require is an off-street parking space. We can't require them to put more landscaping in or anything associated with that.
I guess my question is not related to ADUs, sorry.
Oh,
It was
good.
just in general,
No,
is there
there-
landscaping?
Yeah, we have a
ordinance?
lot, but landscaping in West Jordan's become, for residential, it's really become up to the homeowner because it's based upon water efficiency standards now, not so much vegetation, so people can put not only plant material, but a lot of mineral material in their yards now yeah, it is, yeah. 1 year, yeah.
Sorry, is there a portion in the general code that addresses landscaping, whether with the city or residential? There isn't, okay.
Yeah, it's Title 13, Chapter 13 is the main part.
We'll wait for that portion.
That's just in our regular city code.
Oh, but there's nothing in the general plan about landscaping or sustainability or anything?
I think it's in the sustainability
It's under
chapter. So that
sustainability.
just by coincidence, I think is Chapter 13 of the general plan, right?
Perfect, look at that coordination.
All right, so I'll just kind of move on. But one of the new sections we added to this housing section was the survey results from the survey that we conducted in the early part of 2021. And so there were about 3 or 4 questions on that survey that were relevant to housing. So one was related to multifamily, basically just asking, do we have too much in the city, about enough, not enough? And the results that came back were the majority said we either have too much or we have about enough. So that was kind of interesting.
Quick question. What was the rate of response to that survey out of X number of residents? How many people responded? Or do you even know? I'm just curious.
Alan would know.
I can go look. back there, so thanks. That's,
Th-
I'm good.
There is, and I
Okay.
think we had over 400 responses.
What percentage?
It was
Like
on
point
everybody's
zero?
bill.
I took the survey and I actually want to change my response. I don't think we have enough multifamily, so. I know.
Okay. So the next question was related to housing was density. And so basically this was just asking what's the density like? Does it need to be increased, decreased, that sort of thing? And just over half wanted the density to be decreased. So kind of similar to the last question in some respects, but. And then the last question is related to small lot subdivision. This was kind of interesting. About 3/4 of all responses were opposed to seeing more small lot subdivisions, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, those were the results. And then the last one, just the preferred type of housing, just asking, do you prefer townhome, single family? Overwhelming response was for single family.
Mark?
Yeah.
I know that this survey was sent out back at the beginning of 2021. And maybe it was before the market really went crazy the way it has, right? Were there any questions related to like housing affordability in the city at all?
There wasn't, no.
Okay.
Not that I could find.
Because
There was a question as to, that I didn't mention here, to kind of rank your priorities in terms of your concerns like safety or traffic or affordable housing came in at number 3 or 4, I believe.
okay. Because I know, at least for me, when I took this survey, my focus in that time point was more of, yeah, like I want my housing value to increase. And so in order for it to increase, West Jordan in general needs to be known for large lot sizes, nice houses, XYZ. And now that I have grown in my experience in my profession, and now that I've seen what the market has done, I think that a lot more people are focused on more of that housing affordability perspective. And so I know for me as like a young parent, finding housing that is affordable would be impossible if we hadn't bought before 2020, right? And so prioritizing that as we move through housing, and I know that it's controversial for a lot of residents who did answer the survey, but I think that one of the best ways is with multifamily housing and with small lot sizes. And I just think that in general, if we can make that, and I'll talk about that with the goals as well, but a big priority in the city and it's a priority for the state as well, to prioritize affordable housing. And that's my spiel.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so just kind of moving on here. With housing valuation markets, so we just updated these with the new numbers. So we saw some interesting trends that are maybe not too surprising, just considering the news stories lately, but yeah, so a lot of the home prices steadily grew in the first half of the decade, but then around 2015 kind of started rising. So you kind of see that similarity with the amount of building permits being issued and kind of the rising prices. So I thought that was kind of an interesting correlation there. But, so more specifically, between 2015 and 2020, the average home price actually nearly doubled. So in 2015, it was $272,000. In 2020, it jumped to $418,000. So pretty big jump there. Another thing we looked at was kind of the east versus west trends, or more specifically by zip code. And what we found were the east side was tended to have the highest price increases overall in the average sale price, but they had the lowest starting prices. And then on the west side, we saw the reverse of that. So On the west side, it was the lowest, they had the lowest rise in prices, but had the highest starting price. So obviously with newer homes and things like that. So. Okay. So with the rental housing rates, we looked at that. I'm just kind of a quick, interesting fact here. We found that more than half of all renters pay 30% or more of their income on rent. I thought that was something, and this was kind of a little bit new to the general plan. There wasn't a whole lot of emphasis in the previous one, but we kind of felt that that area needed a little bit more study, and so thought those findings were pretty interesting there. And then the age and conditions of the housing stock. Relatively speaking, West Jordan's pretty new. About 4% of our housing is from the 1950s and older, so we really don't have a whole lot of, I guess, what you'd consider historical homes. And then kind of the flip side of that is about a third of our housing is 20 years or younger. So yeah, we've got a pretty good stock of new housing in the city. So I'm just going to go over projected market conditions a little bit. So a lot of the vacant land, as you know, is on the west side, but a lot of that within the past few years has been master planned, particularly with some of these larger planned communities like Wood Ranch and Jones Ranch. And then with the household size, looks like that's been kind of decreasing over the last 50 years, pretty much since the 1960s. So as of 2020, we're down to just over 3 persons per household. So household composition was kind of in a similar vein. We saw a huge change in the composition there. So in the last general plan we did, the vast majority was married couple with kids. That's pretty much flipped now. Now the majority is either a married couple with no children or what we consider a non-family. So maybe the parents aren't married or something like that. So that's kind of a big change. That's a census term, so you'd have to ask them.
I'd be curious to know why the switch. I mean, this is obviously just an esoteric question, but I mean, that surprises me. I would think there would be more families in West Jordan than married couple with no children. So.
At the time of this survey, which I took, I was married without kids.
Aha.
So.
Okay.
Right. So then the last section here just goes over.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
Could people who are common law marriages, like basically living together but not married by law, could they be included in that 23%?
I'd imagine so. Yeah.
So really, it's upwards of 50% of what, even if it's not a traditional family because they're not married by law, we still have 50% of people who are married with in some situation.
Right. So the last section here just kind of talks about future demand. So one of the section here just kind of goes over the last 10 years and how, after the 2008 recession, we kind of saw a drop off in new homes being built, and since then that has kind of steadily increased. But the demand has kind of outpaced that supply, and so it just kind of gives a general description of that.
Mark?
Yeah.
just dropping back a little bit to average household size, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Your chart here goes from 1960 to 2050, and household size is projected to drop to 2.9. In my neighborhood, I'm aware of 3 situations where children have purchased homes, and they're renovating the homes so mom and dad can now come and live with them, and brother and sister can come and live with them because they can't afford to buy their own home. So as housing prices increase, families are having to make decisions to move in with each other in order to have a place to live. So it'll just be interesting to see what happens over the next decades.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely have to watch for that next 2030 census and see what happens.
So, interesting, if you go back to that the census definition of a non-family is consists of a householder living alone, a one-person household, or where the householder shares a home exclusively with people to whom he or she is not related. So I imagine Provo, Utah, and Logan, Utah have a lot of non-families. Where, college town definitely would.
Okay, and that's pretty much it for the statistics section. The rest is just kind of goes over the goals and policies, but I don't know. If you have any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer those.
I don't have questions, sorry. I have comments. This is why I came tonight. I love that we're doing the general plan. I'm so excited by this. So thank you guys so much for everything you've done because this just floats my boat. Okay, goal number 6. I think that this should be higher. And I think that it should be higher, not only in accordance with state statute and what the state is pushing for with moderate income housing and affordable housing throughout the state, which I think that this would really fit in well with that. But I also think that if we push goal 6 up, that it will also make us reevaluate kind of the housing mixes that we're also pushing forward and some of the zoning that we have. And that is my thought there.
And so you're assuming, because of ranking, that it is a lower priority goal?
Yes.
Was that the
Are these,
intent?
are they higher?
So are they
prioritized?
hierarchical?
Yeah, well, in this, this is actually kind of an old format. This is the one that we had sent to you originally. We're actually kind of in the process of reformatting how this is, just the organization. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we're basically taking these goals and kind of organizing them into categories. So if you wanted to, we could with goal 6, just look at that and within its, I guess, its own subcategory, we can just kind of bump that up on the hierarchy.
So you'd like to see that more as a priority than it is, you feel now, correct?
Yes, if it's
Okay.
ranked in terms of 1 through 12, I think that 6 in the middle is not necessarily where we should be prioritizing it, and it should be higher.
And they're not, the numbers don't necessarily
Reflect the priority.
reflect a ranking in importance. It's
Okay.
just kind of how it is, but if you'd like it moved up, we can certainly do that.
And that's just my opinion.
I'll second.
Thanks.
I'll second. I can't. I'm not
We're only allowed to have one
I'm not
at
a
a time.
room. There's no room.
Well,
I'll second that.
I
It's not gonna happen.
I don't know if this is the right point in time to go on record about this, but I tend to disagree. I recognize the need for multifamily dwellings in the community. There has to be a place for that. But I'll just say, there are lots of people who may want to come to West Jordan looking for larger lots, larger houses. There are lots of people who may be looking for larger lots and larger houses, and they don't want to live around a lot of apartments. To me, that makes West Jordan more desirable, whereas lots of multifamily units make it less desirable.
I love that you disagree.
We should do this more often.
We should. This is great. Because this is a discussion item on the agenda, right? And I would also agree, I think that that is the beauty of the Planning Commission, that as we create these different zones and densities, that we get to decide and look at the city in its entirety and in its whole and decide these are places that would be better for larger lots, which are going to be more expensive. And these more commercial areas, and I mean, I'm sure we'll get to the economic development portion of the general plan, but those areas that are closer to TODs or that have higher economic development priorities in those areas, that as we prioritize more multifamily housing around those areas, and actually I don't think that we should incentivize a lot of condos. I think that multifamily in the sense of townhomes or close, yeah, I guess condos too, but that those areas are just so great for people who are wanting to get into home ownership and start that journey and that out.
Commissioner Quinny?
I think it's great that you said that because I've been on a bit of an island for 8 years by myself in the multifamily arena. So I'm glad I've got a little bit of an ally here too, but I'm glad to have another ally on the planning commission.
I think the important thing there is the word variety. It doesn't really go one way or the other. The important thing, if a variety is going to allow us to put multifamily housing in appropriate locations, a variety will also allow us to continue to maintain traditional larger lots for individuals. Maybe a question for Larry, I'll catch him off guard. How much land do we have that that's still available, that isn't under some sort of agreement or development plan or something? How much do we have that can be developed?
1,500 acres,
Still quite a bit.
but most of it is being snapped up either in the southwest quadrant or other. So it's, until annexation into the Okers, if and when that takes place, it's running out. The dry farms are getting used up. So
I'll supplement Commissioner Allen's question to that. How much of West Jordan is located within an RDA that is slotted for redevelopment in the sense that it will be redeveloped towards housing?
here's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to have Ray write this down, then we're going to bring you accurate information next time. Because yeah, it has changed substantially in the 10 years I've been here. And so I'm probably, since I've lived here my whole life. And I remember when there's 2,000 people in West Jordan and now there's that in a neighborhood. And so.
So sometime between 1964 and 1981.
Yeah, we had a big, a lot of people leave now.
Did you say 2,000 people?
I also just want to echo Commissioner Allen again, his sentiment about the variety. I think that the city should be highly varied in the zones and in the locations, because that will bring more economic development, that will bring different types of housing, different individuals, and more diversity to the city, which is definitely needed and necessary.
Just know as we go through these goals, there are, in fact, quite a few goals that talk about that variety and the importance of that variety in housing.
So you jumped a page here.
Yeah,
Back
are we
to that
skipping
ADU
policy
goal.
too?
Go back one more. Goal 10 for the ADUs, I'd love to see a sub-goal on that to try to expand our understanding of what's out there. I don't know how that would be done, but these are the nebulous goals. The measurable ones come later. But love to see if we can figure out how to inventory what exists.
And I think what exists is also possible ADUs that aren't being used as ADUs. Because our home could be an ADU, but we don't use it as an ADU. Don't know how that would work, but good luck.
Okay, with historic preservation.
Wait, I have more comments about policy
sorry.
2 and policy 4.
Good effort, Ray.
Do you want me to just go? Do you want me to just go through them? I wasn't sure. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, policy 2, goal 5. Let's see. Policy 2, goal 5. I hate it. I think that compromising architect standards, developers will always go cheaper. It doesn't matter if we require higher standards or not. They'll build for the market and their biggest profit margin. So I do not think the city should compromise what are our architectural standards in the process to satisfy their development. I understand with housing affordability and all that those things can play a marginal portion of it. We aren't going to go for Park City building design standards. That's not where we're going. But I don't think we have to compromise what we already have. In fact, if we're looking towards beautifying the city, I think that it could be buffed out to incorporate more diversity. I would love to see more developments in the city that are closer to the kind of diversity that you see just in that small section of Daybreak, rather than what you see in these large developments that are coming in usually, that will come in with like 2 variations of a townhome and 3 different variations of a single family dwelling unit that are going to go in. I would love to see more diversity in what we are requiring, which will incur more price increase on the part of the developer, but I think that it will lead to more diversification of our city, more beautification, and less cookie cutter developments.
May I interject?
Yes.
Sorry. Take a breath. Okay. My quick question is, I'm understanding architectural standards to be like a home that's on a corner lot. You have to do the facing all the way around.
I think a brick and rock standard.
Yeah. Is that what you're referring to in architectural standards?
Yeah, so
in my mind, that is
as far as West Jordan's concerned, yeah.
But in my mind, that's a silly requirement because a home doesn't need to have facing all the way around if it's on a corner lot. It just causes an increased expense, and it doesn't change the quality of the home. They can still use quality product. So in that regard, I think there are some ways that those standards could be amended.
I will respectfully disagree. Because I think that if the home, no matter what side is front facing the street, even if it's the side or the front, both angles should be beautiful. And I think that if you have all facing angles that are facing the public beautified, I think it creates a more beautiful and cohesive city.
Did you write that down?
No.
Read it off.
No.
That just came out.
I really like houses.
No, well done. Well stated.
Do any other commissioners have any other items, or should I just go through my list? I only have 2 more things.
You're on a roll. Just keep going.
Okay, 3 more things. Goal 6. I think it should be higher. I love goal 7. We can go on to policy number 4 now. I'm so sorry. And then housing policy 4, goal 1. I really like this. Have you guys looked at Ogden City? Because they actually implement some housing revitalization standards and funds provided by the city in order to help residents beautify some of the older existing homes to kind of renew some of those more aged and tired areas. Those are my comments regarding housing. Thank you.
Right, does anyone else have any more comments or?
Can I follow up? In Ogden, are those historic homes?
They are, so I know we wouldn't have historic funding for those,
That's where the funding comes
but I
from.
still like it. We could do RDA funding.
Well, and I think Ogden has its own housing authority too, right? Gives them a little bit of an advantage.
They do, same as Salt Lake City.
Well, this city does expend a considerable amount of CDBG money on on income qualified residents for making their homes safe to live in and comfortable to live in. But it's not so much directed at the aesthetics or appearance. And so, that money is expended towards that end, but I understand what you're talking about. So, okay, thank you.
Right, does anyone else have any comments before we move on to the next chapter? No? Okay.
Okay, thanks. So the last chapter you're looking at tonight is Chapter 8, Historic Preservation. In going through this, the General Plan Committee did take a good close look at this and reworked some of the sections on it. With West Jordan being, it's a little newer community than you might, you find in other areas of the Salt Lake Valley. So we really only have a couple of sites that are on the National Historic Register. And maybe this is a little bit long and lengthy, but given that we only have those sites. But, as the city grows older, a lot of the properties are going to become historically, they're going to be eligible for historic preservation. So we thought what we do is put the information in there so that when it does come available, that it's in the general plan. We won't have to go back through and look at it. We did also run this through the State Historic Preservation Office, just to make sure that our terminology was up to date and correct. And so those changes were made to this chapter. Do you have any questions on this one? Okay.
I think the only statement, outside of the handful of miscellaneous things I'll send to you, I would love to see on the pictures just a note saying where it was taken, what it is, when it was installed, something like that. Like this, I know what that is, but just something that says where that's located and what it is.
Okay. Okay, anything else on that? That's been very helpful, thank you.
Any other comments?
Thank you guys so much. This is really great.
Commissioners, did you like this format? I mean,
I think it's very useful because the interaction between the commission and staff is, I think, very useful instead of just going down, yeah, no. So I kind of like it.
And Ray, I mean, do you have a game plan for next meeting? Just so that, yeah.
I just got to this meeting. We'll just take another couple look at some of the other chapters, the ones that we have. We're going to definitely leave the land use till the last because we're going to tie that in with the general plan. We're still waiting to hear back from the Sustainability Committee on their recommended changes to the sustainability and economic development. No, the environment section. It starts with me. But we may go through the economic development one. We'll pick 4 and then get those to you to take a look at.
I think 4 is a good number to kind of go through. It's not too much, but yet it's enough to kind of keep moving the ball forward.
Yeah.
I think I'd suggest going by page number as opposed to quantity of chapters. Try to stick around 30 pages or fewer.
This has just a big picture on the page.
Those are my favorite pages.
The only ones I understand.
Yeah, but you left out all of the stick figures. See, now I understand stick figures. So,
This is very well done, thank you.
but yes, thank you. And I want to reemphasize the appreciation for all of the hard work that both the committee and staff has done. I've kind of seen this progress in the last year and a half, and it's kind of exciting. And I think it was well overdue. So, thank you very much. All right, that is our last item on the agenda. I think I will make a motion.
I move to adjourn.
Oh! All right, I'll second that.
Recording stopped.